Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my true crime partner, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you tonight?
Hey, man, I'm doing really well.
That's
How
good.
about you, man?
I'm great.
Yeah, I can't believe the amount of unsolved podcasts that we put out already.
11.
That's going really fast, and we just recorded on our normal podcast. We're up to 21.
One. Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing to me. So, just a short period of time, how much we've put out.
Well, speaking of that, we might as well start off with that, because if you found True Crime All the Time Unsolved
Yeah,
and don't know about our other podcast, True Crime All the Time, make sure you go out, give that a listen, give it a try. We got some new Patreon supporters
we do.
that we have to give shout outs to. So Jennifer Richard, Jordan, no last name.
Right.
Got Jordan Lemons, who has been fan from
Day one.
Yeah, essentially from the very, very beginning.
And we were lucky enough that she co-hosted one of our hometown series.
Yeah, listener hometown on True Crime All the Time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, she did that with us. It was great. Catherine Clark, Jeanette Craig. So big thanks to all of our new Patreon supporters. And as always, huge thanks to those that keep supporting us.
Absolutely, man. Just stick with us month after month.
Yep, it means the world to us. It really does. Make sure you go out, visit our website at truecrimeallthetime.com. You can get all of our contact information, so you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Make sure you click on the merchandise button. I just ordered some new stickers, True Crime All the Time stickers.
They look really good too.
Yeah, they're going to be great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, when I was putting together the store, there were certain things that I thought would be really cool. And for some reason, stickers never crossed my mind.
No.
But a ton of people have reached out to me and said, when are you going to get stickers? Why don't you have stickers? I just didn't realize that was such a big thing. I think a lot of people like to have stickers of their favorite podcasts.
Yeah.
And so they should be up on the store by next week. I'll send something out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'll also be sending out stickers to all of our Patreon supporters. So we'll get that done. And go ahead, Gil.
I was going to say, I really like the coffee mugs.
Oh, the coffee mugs are great.
Those are awesome.
And the tumblers are cool too. Storm got a tumbler and tweeted how much she liked it.
Oh, yeah.
It's double walled, so you get that insulation.
Yeah.
Keeps it from sweating on the outside. But anyway, if you want to help support us on Patreon, you can do that. Go to patreon.com/truecrimeallthetime. Now, Gibbs, the last thing I want to talk about is CrimeCon. And you and I are going to be at CrimeCon in June.
Right.
I think it's the second weekend in June.
Yeah, it's like the 8th or something.
Yeah, I don't have the dates in front of me. But,
Right.
If anybody out there listening is going to CrimeCon, shoot us an email at truecrimeallthetime@gmail.com. We're trying to set up a kind of a meet and greet for listeners of either of the podcasts. And whether that's at the hotel or we rent out, part of a restaurant.
Yeah.
All of that depends on how many responses we get. And especially if you're from the Indy area, that would help us a lot. And I'm looking for somebody that would possibly maybe want to help coordinate the meetup as well. So, and if you haven't looked at CrimeCon, it really looks cool. Go out to the website and there's going to be a ton of people there. Nancy Grace, Aphrodite Jones, Ken Kratz from Making of a Murderer documentary is going to be there. A whole bunch of other people. I can't even remember, but a lot of cool people.
Yeah, should be a good time.
Yeah. And they're going to have it's a whole murder mystery weekend.
Yeah.
If you're staying at the hotel, you get like clues in your room. And I mean, they're really going all out for this thing. But the other, what I'm really looking forward to is number one, meeting fans of the show, but also getting to interact with other podcasters, because there's going to be a ton of them there. I think, Generation Y, Twisted Philly, Curiosity Kills, a lot of the podcasts that I assume many people that listen to us also listen to some of these other true crime podcasts. So it could be that we even, all get together or get together with some of the folks. I've talked to Deanna from Twisted Philly and some of the other people. Maybe we can do like a joint session and do, something about true crime podcast. I think that'd be very interesting.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool.
But, we'll see when we get there. But we'd love for anybody to come out and let us know if you're going so we can meet up. So what are we talking about today, Gibbs?
Man, we are going to talk about the tube sock killings.
All right, you picked this one.
Yeah.
I'll let Gibby pick one.
I tell you,
I'm really going out on a limb
I
here.
know, he's putting the faith in me, but...
No, I'm just kidding.
I know. But, think about tube socks. I mean, when's the last time you seen a pair of tube socks anyway?
Yesterday when I wore them.
Well, besides you, most people out there probably haven't heard about tube socks since, so you can kind of guess the age of...
Wait a minute. What are we calling tube socks? Are you calling them the white ones with like
the stripes.
The stripes?
Yeah.
I just wear the regular white ones.
I'm talking about... This is bad, but if you're pulling them up over your calves, maybe that's what's back in now. I don't know. I don't think so.
I mean, I'm not wearing the 1970s, early 80s white ones with the blue rings, if that's what you're talking about.
The blue or the red rings? Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Okay.
Those are the tube socks.
All right. That's not what I wear.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about the tube sock killings. This is in the community of Mineral, Washington, which kind of borders the counties of Lewis and Pierce County in Washington State. Again, we're talking, around the summertime of 1985.
So, Gibbs, I mean, I think these murder cases had some publicity.
Yeah, they did.
Back then.
They did.
We're like you said, we're talking 1985. I mean, to the point where they were even featured on Unsolved Mysteries. So there was interest in the case, right? To get that type of publicity.
Right.
To make it on Unsolved Mysteries. But let's just jump right in.
Okay.
Because there's some really fascinating aspects of this case. And I think it's the reason why it jumped out at you and the reason you picked it.
So before we dive in, Mike, what always piques my interest is that in these areas, we always find out. So we're looking into these unsolved murders, but we always stumble across like other really disturbed individuals, killers that are within the same, I guess the word zone or geographical area. And it just blows me away. I mean, it's just bizarre to me that you can have that many people doing bad things in such a small zone.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about and what I get from it is there is a ton of serial killers operating at any one time in any given area, because, to your point, we're going to talk about this case, and at some point we're going to be talking about potential suspects.
Right.
And there's going to be some people that people may be familiar with.
Right.
And it could be a whole host of high profile. I guess that's what I'm getting to. All of these high profile killers, at some point or another, they are in areas of these unsolved murders. So you have to look at them.
Yeah, they get linked for sure.
Yeah,
right.
You have to take a look at them, because if they killed X number of people,
right, then
what's the probability that they also killed these other people that they didn't either get caught for or admit to? Because, we say that on our other podcast a lot, right? You got caught for these murders, But how many more did
you
somebody
commit?
did somebody commit, but because they couldn't link them to them, or the person's not going to offer up, oh yeah, I know you got me for these 4,
Right.
but I want to let you know I also killed 10 people in Washington.
Right.
Yeah,
They don't say it.
they're not going to do that.
No.
So to your point, it is very interesting because we don't know who the killer is,
Right.
but you can go down the rabbit hole of it could be X number of people.
Absolutely. And it never fails. It always has the additional tie-ins.
Well, and to that point, I would say that researching the unsolved cases is harder than researching the solved.
Oh, by far.
Because on the solved, you've got most of the facts.
Yeah.
On the unsolved, what you have are the facts of the case, but then you're searching.
Yeah. And you have tons of assumptions.
Yes.
And that's,
But to me, and some people don't like unsolved cases, but to me, that is part of the interest. Who could it be?
yeah, you're playing the detective.
Right. We don't know who it is. Let's try to figure it out type
Right.
of deal. Let's start August 10th, 1985. We have Stephen Harkins, who's 27, and his girlfriend, Ruth Cooper. She's 42. They leave their Tacoma, Washington home, and they're going on a weekend camping trip at Tool Lake, which is in Pierce County.
Right.
So both Stephen and Ruth, they worked at the same vocational school in Tacoma.
Okay.
And when they did not show up on Monday for those jobs, their families obviously became very, very worried.
You got a little nervous, I would think.
And right away they reported them missing. Now, it wasn't very long, only 4 days later. So this is August 14th. There were some hikers that were, hiking through Pierce County, and they find the body of Stephen Harkins. And his body's found near a really, what I took as a very remote campsite.
Yeah, I mean, they were up in the mountains, up in the forest for sure.
So Stephen had been shot in the head with a .22 caliber firearm. He'd also been shot in the body. So one interesting fact, Gibbs, that jumped out at me was that when they found him, he was still in his sleeping bag.
And not only did they find him in his sleeping bag, but the sleeping bag, he was in the truck bed, is where he...
So whether camping, they must have been sleeping in the truck
Yeah,
bed.
probably get off the ground.
Yeah.
That's how my wife would want to camp. She wouldn't want to be on the ground.
A little warmer.
Yeah,
When you're
away
not on
from
the cold
snakes
ground.
and things like that. Yeah.
But I guess what this does, and I think it makes a lot of sense, is it basically is pointing to the fact that he was shot and killed while sleeping,
Yeah.
right? He's still in his sleeping bag. It makes perfect sense that either somebody came up on him and, shot him in the head, shot him in the body.
Yeah. So he
a few
didn't
times.
have a chance to fight.
Right. Well, yeah, because it's not real easy to get out of a sleeping bag real quick, and I assume he didn't have much lead time anyway.
Right.
I'm thinking that somebody walked up on him.
So when you say he was shot, and then from what I understand, it was a .22 caliber. So at point blank, I mean, I know you know more about this than I would. So does a .22 caliber at point blank, is that going to do a lot of damage?
Well, yeah, I think anything at a point blank range, and again, it depends on where.
Right.
But my understanding of a .22, and I think more people are killed with .22s in the United States than any other caliber.
That's interesting.
And a lot of that is because there's a lot of .22s. Now, that may have changed over the years, but I know I heard that at one point.
I'm guessing it's cheaper ammo.
It was until
Recent, yeah.
the ammo kind of jacked up, but it is cheaper than everything else. But one of the things about it that I've always read is that unlike some of the more powerful calibers that will go through, the 22 will go in, but then it will not exit.
So more of a ricochet effect?
Yeah, so what you get is it bouncing around, I think, and it actually causes a lot of damage that way.
Okay.
Because you can get shot, in somewhere in your body with, let's say, a 45.
Okay.
Or a 9mm.
Right.
And the 9's going so fast, it'll go through. But the 22 may not, and it'll bounce around inside all of your organs.
So it can hit your ribs and bounce a different direction and do more damage than it would.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
So not to get too much into
No, but to me it was just an interesting, that it was a 22 caliber, which is,
well, you think of 22 as like a little plinker gun.
Yeah, like if you're hunting squirrels or something like that.
Right. But I think there are a lot of people that survive like 122 shot. But I also think that, in the right place and in the right ricochet type pattern, it can actually do more damage sometimes than other calibers.
Yeah.
Now, there's going to be somebody that knows a lot about guns saying, hey, you're fully what, but
that's right.
That's my knowledge of it.
Yeah.
Anyway. And I do think that can happen in certain circumstances. So searchers also find their dog, Harkins and Cooper, and the dog has been shot too, which I found very strange. Why shoot the dog?
It is a weird thing to do.
Now, do you have what kind of dog it is? Because I don't.
I don't either.
And unless the dog was vicious or attacking, why shoot the dog? So 2 months later, Gibbs, this October 26th, a skull is found. And it's found near Hearts Lake. And this is about a mile or two from where Stephen's body was found. And ultimately, they would figure out that this was the skull of Ruth Cooper through dental records. And then it's just 2 days later after that, they find her body and purse, basically in the same area.
Yeah, not too far away from
where the skull was found. Now, here's where we get into the interesting part.
Right.
Because a tube sock is tied around Cooper's neck.
Right.
This is obviously tying into the fact that this is called the tube sock killer.
At a later date, I asked to observe the sock which was used around the neck of Ruth Cooper. And when he dumped it out on a desk in the evidence lab, the hair stood up on the back of my neck and I shivered a little.
Now, they would do an autopsy on Ruth Cooper, and the autopsy finding would say that she died of homicidal violence, although later on they'd come out and say that she did have a gunshot wound to the abdomen and died of that. Homicidal violence is a very broad term.
Yeah, that's
kind of a strange term to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it just means you were killed by somebody else?
Yeah, so were they saying because the tube sock was around her neck that she was strangled?
No, because I would think if that was the case, the autopsy would say strangulation.
Right.
So unless they just weren't sure whether it was the sock or the gunshot.
Right.
But it sounds like later on they come out and they're basically saying she died of a gunshot wound to the abdomen.
But why the tube sock around the neck?
Well, it's bizarre, and I think that's
especially since it wasn't if it was not the cause of death.
Right.
I mean, that's just something weird to do.
Well, and I think that's why this case is it's part of why this case is very interesting.
It really is to try to figure some of this stuff out that people do.
So after they discover Cooper, obviously they've already discovered Stephen Harkins. This is when they start to publicize. I think they go on Crime Stoppers and talk about it. and they're hoping to get somebody to step forward with any information about these murders that would lead to the arrest.
Right. And it's around that time that law enforcement, they kind of are thinking that it could be connected to the earlier murders of Edward Smith and Kimberly Levine. And those murders were around March of 1985. So, what, five months earlier?
About 5 months before Harkins and Cooper.
So the couple, they were from Kent, Washington, and they were abducted, they were murdered, and then the bodies were disposed of near a gravel pit on the Columbia River. And Ed's body was actually found on March 10th, and they found the body with his throat cut. At the time, they didn't know who he was, right?
They couldn't identify.
They couldn't identify him. So on March 23rd, they find their car. It's at an overlook looking out on the Columbia River at one of the, the places you can park, before you can go out and camp in the forest. So eventually the family reports Ed and Kimberly missing. At that point, they realized the body they found on the Columbia River was Ed. Now they have an extensive search, but it yields no find for Kim. It's not until August that Kim's remains were found. And it was actually just by chance of a passerby going by. And the body was mixed in with the brush, the sagebrush area. And it really wasn't too far from where they found Ed's body.
So it must have been pretty well covered or disguised.
Yes. Yeah.
On purpose?
I think so.
So that always fascinates me, right? So if you kill two people, why do you hide one body and leave the other one out in the open?
Yeah, doesn't make sense, does it?
Yeah.
Why not go ahead and try to do the rest? Or did she stumble on that and he or she did not want to go after the body?
Yeah, maybe she ended up that way naturally on her own.
Right.
Because that just doesn't make any sense. You're either leaving both out to be found,
right,
or you're hiding both so they're not found. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just something weird.
So the police are able to lift a fingerprint out of the car, but it's not for about 4 years before they can actually get a match. And it happens to be an inmate at the Wyoming State Prison. There's an inmate named Billy Ray Ballard.
You know what I always say, Gibbs? If you have to say their middle name,
yeah, Billy Ray,
serial killer.
That's right.
There's a lot of serial killers that have 3 names.
So Washington State, they were able to get him extradited and to keep from getting the death penalty. He pleaded guilty and he received a life with no parole. But he had nothing to do. Eventually, they realized he had nothing to do with Harkins and Cooper.
But I assume they spent a lot of time trying to figure that out.
They did. They tried to see if they could put him on that one, but eventually they realized they couldn't.
Okay.
But so that's really our first suspect on this one. But again, here we are with as we talked about when we first started the intro to the podcast tonight, another weirdo.
Yeah, so that was our first rabbit hole. Didn't
turn out anything.
Didn't turn out to be anything. So let's go back to Steve and Ruth, talking about them. And, it was said, Gibbs, that at the time that Steve died, he had been in some kind of feud with a man and it was over damaging his Harley Davidson motorcycle.
Okay.
And if there's one thing you don't mess
Don't
with,
touch my Harley.
is somebody's Harley.
That's right.
Everybody knows that. And apparently Steve and Ruth, they had gone to some wedding reception right before they were going to go on this camping trip. And this individual that Steve was having the feud with, he showed up at the reception. But it was right after Steve and Ruth had left. Everybody said his intent was to confront Steve. So again, we're talking about a second suspect.
Sure. With motive.
With a motive. And by all accounts, this man appeared to be a viable suspect, but the police were never able to develop any kind of evidence, linking him to the scene of the crime, to the area, nothing like that.
And this is rural Washington. I don't want to say people took care of their own business, but people took care of their own business.
No, I would agree. There's a lot of places in the country like that where, justice was dealt with, or
Absolutely.
whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
So again, we're not very far into this, and already we've got two suspects that I don't want to say the first one they cleared. This guy, they never cleared. They just couldn't link him.
Couldn't link him. All right.
So about a month after they discovered Ruth, so we're talking about December 1985.
Right.
This is where another couple, so you've got Mike Reamer, he's 36 years old.
Yeah, he's a tall guy. He's like 6 foot tall.
Yeah, kind of a big guy.
Big guy, yeah.
And he's with his girlfriend, Diana Robertson. She's 21. And they have a daughter named Crystal, who's 2.
Mm-hmm.
And they left their Tacoma, Washington home, and they were going to find a Christmas tree. That's what they were leaving to do. And the place that they chose to go find it was near this, it was called the Nisqually River, or Nisqually.
Easy for you to say.
Exactly. Now, a lot of stuff about Reamer, right? This guy was an animal trapper. And again, we're talking about rural Washington.
Yeah. Big outdoors guy.
Yeah. He planned to do some other things on this trip. He planned to check on his traps that he had set in the area. And then, by all accounts, everything went to hell. So what happens later that day, and this is something I really want to talk about, the daughter, Crystal, who again is only 2 years old, she's found walking around alone at a Kmart in a town called Spanaway, which is about 30 miles from where the family had been in this forest, looking for this Christmas tree and checking on the traps and all that.
Right. So
we got to talk about this.
Absolutely.
So number one, we're going to find out about what happened to Reamer and Robertson. But before that, how does a 2-year-old end up traveling 30 miles alone at a Kmart? Now, I'm not saying she traveled alone.
No. How'd she get there?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the big mystery. And there's a lot of theories. And we'll probably talk about a few of them as we, go down the line here. But, and you got to remember, this time of the 1985, they probably didn't have 15 cameras, surveillance cameras outside of the Kmart.
I'd be shocked if they had any.
Yeah. Where they could have went and got the tape and seen what kind of vehicle pulled up and what car she got out of or whatever. So,
but I think the one thing that we know is a 2-year-old didn't get 30 miles on their own.
No,
that's not possible.
Not at all.
I mean, a 2-year-old alone in the woods would probably die there in the woods.
Absolutely.
With nobody else to help them. I just don't see any way that And plus, a 2-year-old couldn't walk that far.
So if you're the store manager or a customer, you see a 2-year-old standing out in front of the store. I mean, you're thinking, where's the parents?
Yeah. Well, and so witnesses would describe her as being dazed, and she wasn't talking right away. So Crystal was only able to really provide one important piece of information when she was asked about, obviously they were asking her, where's your parents? Where's your parents? And she said just one thing: Mommy's in the trees. So Gibbs, I think in researching the case, there's a lot of speculation about what that statement means.
Right.
And there's a lot of people, or there's people that have very different opinions on what Mommy's in the trees means.
Right.
Now, I think you and I, and maybe we agree, maybe we don't, I think what I saw probably the most and what made the most sense to me was that a 2-year-old saying Mommy's in the trees means Mommy's in the forest.
Yeah.
Or in the woods.
And I agree with that. Having kids, knowing how their thought
mind
process,
works.
their mind works at 2. That's what they're trying to say.
Yeah, I believe that too. But if you research this case, there's a lot of people that think,
oh, absolutely.
Whether, she's hanging from a tree,
Right.
she's up in the trees, all kinds of different things. But so Crystal, the 2-year-old, she's placed in temporary foster care. And it's not until 2 days later that her grandmother sees a photograph of her on the local news.
And as soon as she saw me, she put her arms out and said, "Grandma." And they put her down and she ran to me. And I've had her ever since.
So obviously that was a clip of the grandma. So now, Gibbs, we get into the police search for Mike and Diana. And they're searching on foot. They're searching, using planes. Because, you got to remember, this is probably not a real easy area to search.
Yeah, we know it's forest area, and I think they're trying to look for a needle in a haystack. I mean, they're trying to find Mike's 1982 Plymouth pickup truck, but the searches aren't turning up anything.
No, they're finding nothing. So it's not till February 18th, and that's really, 2 months after the couple disappeared and 2 months after Crystal shows up at the Kmart,
Right.
that a motorist discovers Diana Robertson's corpse, and it's buried in a snowbank near a logging road right off of Washington State Route 7.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in Mineral, Washington.
Yeah, so they're deep in the forest around that area.
Yeah. Now they're still searching for Mike, and by all accounts, they've got, over 50 law enforcement officers. They've got a bunch of volunteers. They're searching the woods around the murder site. They even bring in bloodhounds.
And I think because of the amount of snowfall that they get in that area, I think it keeps setting them back, right? I think they make a little progress and, trying to close off certain areas, but then it snows and it sets them back a few more days.
Yeah, I think they have 6+ inches of snow that's falling, so that's definitely going to make it difficult. But the one thing they do find is Mike's red pickup truck that you mentioned, and they find that pretty close to Diana's body. Now, in the truck, they discover something very mysterious, I guess is the right word.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting.
It's a handwritten note. They find it on the dashboard of the truck, and all it says is, "I love you, Diana." So I guess the question, Gibbs, is where did this note come from?
Yeah.
Did somebody, obviously somebody put it there, but
Right.
was it Mike Reamer? Was it a final goodbye type?
And we don't know because they haven't found Mike. They're still looking for Mike, and
I mean, I think that's one of the questions, right? That's a central question. Who put the note there? If it was Mike, he's with Diana. I'm not sure why he would need to write a letter that says, I love you, Diana.
Right.
I think some of the other theories are that it was someone who put it there to throw the cops off.
Right. So Diana's mom comes forward and she looks at the envelope and she claims that it is Mike's handwriting that's on there.
She was very sure of that, but I don't think the authorities were.
I feel that it was Mike's handwriting. I have cards that he had given to her on different holidays and things that he signed exactly the same way.
I know that Louise Conrad says that handwriting is Michael Reamer's. However, the FBI laboratory is not able to tell us conclusively that that is so. Why did someone put that there? Was it Michael Reamer as a final goodbye, Diana, I'm sorry? Or was it someone who put it there to throw off the authorities and make them think that?
But he says that on the clip there. But the other thing is, it could just been something that he wrote on an envelope at one point and gave it to her. It was just in the truck.
So I think the other thing they find in the truck are bloodstains. And that's where we have to talk about the autopsy that they do on Diana, because what it finds is that she was stabbed 17 times.
Man, that's a lot.
Yeah. And normally, you and I have talked about this before, that type of number means something.
It's aggression.
It shows anger, it shows, and it normally points towards either somebody close to the victim, is what I think.
Right.
Or it points to somebody that's very, very upset with the victim.
Yeah, you done something really bad to get that person flared up like that.
Yes.
17 times.
So we said the autopsy shows she was stabbed 17 times, but maybe even more important is that she, just like Ruth Cooper, was also found with a tube sock tied around her neck.
Yeah.
So right away, I mean, I don't know how you can get a better link between two different sets of killings.
I mean, you're talking within months, within miles,
Yeah, I mean, this is not like, somebody used the same type of ligature knot this is an actual tube sock.
Right. And it's noted that they were tied the same knot method.
Yeah. So even more evidence that these are linked together. So going back to the guy that was having the feud, so if it was that guy, why would he kill the other people?
Right.
Right. So if we're talking about suspects, does that kind of make you lean away from him? So they still don't know where Mike is.
Yeah. And they're still looking.
They are still looking, but they don't know if Mike's alive or he's dead.
Right.
So what it causes is for him to become a suspect.
Which would be natural anyway. If you don't have him, right? I mean, the spouse is normally the number one suspect.
Almost always.
Yeah.
So one of the very first theories I think that comes out from police is, did Mike kill Diana? Did he take his daughter to the Kmart store and then just take off? Drop her off there and take off. Now, the flip side of that, and I think the other theory, is that an unknown serial killer killed both couples and then hid Mike's body and they just haven't found it yet.
Right.
Right. So it's either, right now I think they're operating on one or the other.
One of two things.
Mike's the killer and he killed both Diana and the other people.
And the other couple.
Because of the tube sock.
Right.
Or it's an unknown serial killer.
And they're still searching, trying to find Mike. I think his buddies are out. Or his buddies.
We searched from the spot where Mike would normally start his trap lines, and we followed the whole trap line. And we searched for probably 2-3 hours without nothing.
So to answer your question, yes.
Yeah.
His buddies are out looking for him.
And they can't find him either.
They can't find him. But, I think we have to talk about Mike and Diana. because it was no secret that they had a very rocky relationship. So much so that at the time they took this trip, she had a restraining order against him.
She did.
Which is kind of strange. You know, the order of protection started because Mike had kicked down their apartment door, and by all accounts, he had pushed her face repeatedly down into the carpet. But I guess the couple had kind of reconciled. You know, Mike and Diana had reconciled just a short time, because obviously if she was scared enough to, you know, get a protection order, she's not going to be taking a trip with him.
Right.
I wouldn't think.
You wouldn't think.
He beat her up. He took everything out on her. He blamed her for things that he did. If he was seeing somebody else, he would turn it around like Diana was seeing somebody else and justify it, you know, in his own mind. I don't know why Diana let Mike come back in. Maybe because she had Crystal. I don't know, maybe he was a sense of security for her.
The only thing I can tell you is that she loved him.
Often, the victim allows the assaulting party back in. It's really very common.
Diana had told me that Mike had threatened to kill her and that he could get away with it. And I had told her to be careful and that he couldn't get away with something like that. He was just saying things to scare her.
So we touched on the handwriting
Yep.
note, and we talked about how Diana's mom was convinced that Mike had written that. And I think what she thought it was some type of an apology. But again, the FBI didn't quite agree. They weren't certain that it was his. I think what they had a strong suspicion that because they couldn't find Mike, that he had also been killed that day at the same time as Diana had, but yet they just hadn't been able to discover his body given the amount of wilderness and rugged terrain and all of that. I mean, again, this is not an easy place, I assume, to conduct a search.
No, I mean, this is, again, thick forest area.
It's quite a while before they're able to figure that part of the equation out, because it's not till March of 2011 that some hikers discover a pair of boots and they find a partial skull, and that is later determined to be Mike Reamer.
Yeah. I mean, this is all within a mile radius of where Diana was found.
So I think that goes back. I think that even lends more credence to what we're saying.
Yeah.
Right. So if it took them, what, 25 years?
Yeah. Before they found anything.
And it was only a mile from where Diana was.
That tells you
how hard it is how hard it is to search that.
Yeah, because at this point, then little Crystal's 27.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Wow.
Now, the one thing about it, because it had been so long, they couldn't really say how he died. The only thing they could rule out was a gunshot wound to the head because they had the skull.
Right. So then you still had some different theories. Was he shot by the killer, or was he the killer and he was suicide? Did he kill Diana? Then did he turn the gun on himself after he drove Crystal up to the Kmart, came back, and then killed himself? But then again, if he did shoot himself, where's the weapon?
Right. And I think that's why I kind of rule that out.
Yeah, and I do too.
Because, but there's more questions. You know, again, how did the large number of searchers miss finding his body?
So could the killer have placed the body there after the search?
Yeah, I think these are all valid questions because, again, people are wondering how this body was not found when it was not that far away from. Now, a mile radius is it's a good ways, but you got to figure they did a lot of searching. But I think most people they think Reamer was not a murderer. He was a murder victim.
Yes.
I think the overall, now I'm sure there's some people that believe different things, but I think the majority of people, once he was found, ruled him out as a suspect in the murders.
Yeah, and I think it was also said that, you're talking 25 years, so could he have been partially buried and just erosion over time, brought his body up to the surface where he was, where they could find part of it. Who knows?
So the one thing we haven't talked about, Mike, is that they did find some foreign DNA at both crime scenes. And, obviously as the DNA process became more advanced, they've been able to test it, but they have not been able to match it to any suspect.
So that's interesting too. I was also going to say that they also found near Mike's truck, they did find a rifle shell casing, but again, they couldn't really relate it to what happened to the couple. So it could have just been a hunter.
I'm assuming there's probably a lot of guns being used for hunting, in that area. So finding a rifle case is probably not that uncommon.
Yeah, I think you probably find those throughout.
So, Mike, I want to talk a little bit before we get into some other suspects about some of the things that people have said on the internet about this case.
Yeah, there's some chatter.
There's a lot of chatter and a lot of theories, and a couple of them I found pretty interesting. And one was that, it was thought that this was maybe more of a sophisticated serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
One thing you have to look at is, you're killing two people, which is, to me, always harder than killing one people.
You would know.
One person.
Yeah.
I would know. And also, like we talked about in the beginning, at least one of these guys was a very competent outdoorsman. Could have possibly had his own firearm. I don't know that to be the case. I don't know if they found one or not. But it's the similarities in the killings.
Right.
I think that's just too much to overlook. To say that they would be committed by two different people, I just don't see it. I think it has to be, the connection is too strong.
Well,
with the tube sock alone.
The tube sock alone. So, and the fact that they were able to say that the knot of the tube sock was the same type of knot. Too exact.
All right, Gibbs, let's talk about a couple of suspects. The first one that I have is a guy named Joseph Burgess. And he was an American, but he had taken off to Canada in 1968, I think to avoid the draft.
Yeah, he did.
And he was a suspect in some murders that happened to a young couple up on Vancouver Island in 1972. And the evidence in that case was kind of similar.
Right.
Right. It suggested that he had crept up on this couple while they were sleeping, and he had shot them in the head point blank with the .22 caliber rifle.
That's very similar.
Yeah, eerily similar. By the time that the bodies were found, he was long gone. So he became a fugitive. He was on the run for like 37 years. No one knew where he was. I think most people in law enforcement thought he was dead, either by his own hand or, some other hand.
Right.
Or some other way.
And the tie-in to with him was, well, first, he didn't like the fact that this unwed Christian couple were sleeping together, and he made that well known throughout the campsite. So that was kind of a motive for that. On top of that, the other interesting fact, besides what you already brought up about the 22 being shot in the sleeping bags, was the fact that their dog was also killed. Just like Harkins and Cooper, the first couple murder that we were talking about, how their dog was shot.
Yeah, that's eerie.
It is. I mean, it's kind of, again,
could it be a coincidence? It'd be a heck of a coincidence.
Yeah.
That's a lot of tie-ins.
So you can kind of see a pattern, and that's why I think the police were interested and wanted to have a discussion with him.
So he surfaces later on.
He does.
All right, Gibbs. So the crazy thing about Burgess is he surfaces again in 2009. And it's at this point, he's in New Mexico. And by all accounts, he's been stealing from these local cabins for like a number of years. You know, I think the guy was like a survivalist. I think he was able to live, you know, kind of off the grid. But obviously, it sounds like he would come in and steal stuff from time to time when he needed something to eat.
Supplies and things like that, maybe.
Yeah. Well, they got tired of that, obviously. So the sheriff's deputies, they set up a stakeout and to try to capture this guy. Now, they don't know it's Burgess. At this point, he's known locally as the Cookie Bandit. But Burgess tries to break into the wrong cabin. It happens to be one of the cabins where the sheriffs are. They're trying to catch him in the act. And one sheriff's deputy and the Cookie Bandit are killed in a gunfire shootout. Now, it'd be later, once they do fingerprints to try to figure out who this guy is, that they find out that it's really Joseph Burgess. Now, does that mean that that he's the tube sock killer? No, but it's an interesting thing because, like we talk about, these people are moving around.
Right. It's just
they're crossing a path, or they're crossing areas that make them a suspect.
Yeah. And then again, like it's a rabbit hole, and you chase it and you try to figure out
right
how does it fit in.
I mean, it's unsolved for a reason. We don't know who did it. But
exactly.
I guess the point would be, you know, if he killed this couple in 1972, and then, you know he killed some people later on, is the thought that he didn't kill anybody in between that long period of time? Probably not.
Probably not, but
it's more likely that he did, but we just don't know who. So could he have been the tube sock killer in the 80s? Very possible. But by all accounts, there's nothing to tie him to the murders. Just an interesting suspect, in my opinion. So when we talk about Burgess, we talk about the 72. Right? That's Vancouver Island.
Right.
And I think the theory on him is it's not crazy to think that when he re-entered the United States, because we know he did,
right?
He ends up in New Mexico.
Sure.
That he would have moved in through the northwest area,
right,
of the United States, which would have probably taken him through Washington. He did have some ties to that area of the country,
right,
from before. And it was known, you know, like I said, that he was a survivalist. So could he have been living out in those woods?
Could have.
And stumbled across these two sets of couples? I mean, it's plausible. So there's one other case that is very, very similar to the tube sock killings. And this happens in Oak Ridge, Oregon. Now, it happens in 2005, so it's quite a bit after the murders that we've been talking about. And a couple is murdered, but the tie-in is that their dog is shot
Right.
at the campsite. Now, there's no tube sock,
No tube sock.
but there, and we've got quite a span, but we got quite a span on all these suspects.
Yeah.
And we know from covering a lot of cases that sometimes these people go 20, 30 years without being caught.
Right.
So it's not inconceivable at all that somebody could kill in 72, kill in 85, and then turn around and kill in 2005.
But and I think you're right, and it ties in because again, another couple, the dog, it's in Oregon, and they're just right on the border of Washington State. I don't know, and then I know that a year later, in 2006, a mom and her daughter were camping just on the other side of where this happened, on the Washington State side, and the mom was shot and the daughter was stabbed. So I don't know. It just seems like a lot of similarities.
Well, you know what it's telling me?
Don't camp in Washington.
Don't go camping in either on the border of Oregon and or Washington State.
Right.
We're gonna get a nasty letter from the
You will, Mike.
from the travel board in Oregon and Washington. But no, I mean it. And again, a lot of people are killed all over the country. We're kind of focusing on these woodsy type murders where now on the one that you just talked about, that wasn't a couple, right? So I know you're saying it was happened the next year, but it's a mom and daughter.
Yeah.
It's not a couple.
Not a couple, but still, it was a older daughter. So,
But we also know that killers don't always stick with the exact same
right.
MO every single time.
Maybe it's just a fact he's isolating people out in the wilderness, and it's an easy. And I think if you were a killer, to come across two people isolated out in the wilderness,
Can't get much easier than that, right?
I mean, there's no witnesses. It's easy to do what you got to do.
I guess the one thing that throws me, and we'll go back to the name of the episode, is the tube sock thing.
Yeah.
Again, I still have no idea why.
It's bizarre, man.
And the only thing we know for sure is that I think those two are tied together. All these other ones that we're talking about.
Speculation.
Yeah.
Just, we're, again, trying to find a connection, try to find if these can ever be solved.
Well, and interesting people that could possibly be connected to it.
Just like what we're getting ready to talk about.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're going to bring up the fact that Israel Keys, and Mike probably would know better than I that he was a fairly known serial killer.
No doubt.
So Israel Keys, his first crime was in the state of Oregon, where he admitted raping 14 to 18-year-old girls during a period of 1996 and 1998. They also know that Keys traveled a lot because he was in the construction field. So he would travel basically throughout the lower 48 states.
Well, I think the thing about Keys, Mike, and why there are some people that try to tie him into this, and not just this, right? Try to tie him into all kinds of different things. But the tie-in for him is that he killed at least 4 people in Washington State, and he lived in a bunch of different areas of the state.
He did.
At different times. So, I don't think there's anything that directly or really even closely ties him to this case. But like we talked about a lot,
right?
serial killers, there's always people that like to say, well, it could be this guy.
Right. 'Cause
Well, it could be.
could be. Yeah, he was in the state. He was in that area.
Known killer.
He admitted that he killed some couples in Washington, right?
And that's kind of where his killing career, if you want to call it, started.
Sure.
Because he ultimately branched out across the country,
Yep.
but he started in Washington. Now, the thing about him, though, is most of his stuff, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, most of it happened in the late 90s.
Yeah. When talking about the 2004, 2005 murders that happened in Oregon and Washington State that we were trying to tie in to the tube sock killings, the name that comes up is Israel Keys, but in research, and we know how bad of a guy he was, but when you research that, clearly he had nothing to do with the 1985 murders.
So, Mike, I think the thing with Israel Keys is if you can put him onto the murders that you talked about in 2004 and 2005,
Right.
then that means that person could not be connected with the tube sock killings,
Right.
unless Israel Keys started killing at age 7.
Which we know didn't happen.
Well, I don't know.
Well, it's true.
Maybe that's why there's tube socks involved.
Maybe.
Because I'm still trying to figure out why in the hell there's what significance does the tube sock have?
Yeah. It's just a bizarre thing, man. You know?
Because by all accounts, it wasn't used as a tool for strangulation.
No. It's like more like a calling card.
Yeah.
And if
you know
it
how
wasn't-
hard it would be to strangle somebody with a tube sock?
It'd be hard, man.
It's stretchy.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like a cord.
Hell, I couldn't
or-
even get them to stay up on my calves when I wore them.
Right. I think that's what we're doing. We're isolating the 85 murders back down to one person.
Right.
Even though we like to talk about all these suspects and it's interesting and all that, I still think you've got one person, and they may have killed a bunch of other people that we don't know about.
Right. But they didn't leave a calling card like this one.
Right. So why kill two couples, use the tube sock, never, if they did kill a bunch of other people or even more people,
Right.
they didn't use the tube sock because that would have come out.
Right.
They would have connected it. But I still go back at a base level and say the tube sock is the key,
Yeah.
because what's the reasoning behind it? Nobody knows,
So
but the killer.
the police should really have just looked for the one guy in town with no socks on.
Just walking around barefoot.
Yeah.
Because he used up his
You just two socks on.
two tube socks. So Gibbs, I think the one thing that we know is that there still is a mysterious pattern of unsolved couple murders in the Northwest, right? You
Yeah.
talked about Oregon, you talked about Washington.
Washington.
All happened outdoors in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them involved some type of gunshot to the head, and really all of them without motive or a known motive.
Right.
There's a motive, but we don't know what it is.
We don't. It's strange. And then a few of them with the dogs being killed.
Right. So you add all that together, and some of these span a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the ones that we focused on, which are the tube sock killings.
Right.
And you just wonder if those are isolated two couple murders all by themselves, or did those just happen to involve tube socks, but then you have somebody that's throughout the years
Just
killing
changed.
couples.
Sure. Maybe they wanted to see if they could get something going, and be known as the tube sock killer, but, just couldn't for whatever reason. I mean, it could have been something as simple as that.
Why not? How hard is it to wrap a tube sock around
I don't know.
somebody's neck?
Just depending on when the opportunity came up that they were able to strike
They,
that.
they didn't have the tube sock with them?
Yeah.
Maybe.
I don't know. I mean, it's just bizarre just to kill the two couples in that short period of time and be okay with that as a serial killer.
Yeah, and that's the question. Is it a serial killer?
Right.
So I go back to the first murder where Stephen was having that feud with some unknown man,
Right.
and something popped into my head where I was thinking, so that guy had an axe to grind,
Mm-hmm.
and he killed Stephen and Ruth.
Right.
And to help cover it up, maybe, would this make sense?
Yeah, I see where you're going with it.
Where he comes back later and he kills another couple that he finds through some opportune, chance. Right. But he uses the tube sock twice to connect the two together.
Which isolates, gets him out of the picture now, right?
Because he has no connection with the second couple.
Clearly, he couldn't have done that to the first couple because it's tied into the type of killing. That's a really good point.
Yeah, it's just something that I thought about because, as we were banding...
If he's listening right now, he probably just, what?
He should email me at truecrimeallthetime
Yeah.
at gmail.com.
That's right.
But no, it was just something I thought about because, and maybe that would be too smart for somebody to think about. But if you think about it, what a way to
get the
try to get somebody off of your tracks.
Yeah, I agree.
Because he has, I assume, no connection whatsoever to the second couple.
Right.
And by using that weird tube sock thing, he's tied both murders together.
Yeah.
By everybody's thinking it had to be the same person.
Perfect camouflage. It really is.
Yeah, it's just a thought. All right, Gibbs, that's the case of the tube sock killer.
Yeah, interesting.
It is.
Again, bunch of rabbit holes.
And again, this is an interesting one for listeners, if they want to investigate themselves. Because like we keep talking about, you'll find information that will lead you onto somebody else.
Yeah.
That suspect will lead you to some other rabbit hole.
It makes you think, I looked and I was trying to hope that I could find more information about Crystal, knowing that she would be in her late, gosh, what would she be now? She would be early 30s. 34, yeah.
Ish.
I just thought it'd be interesting to see if she has put anything out yet, about it. But then again, I mean it too. How well did she?
Yeah, remember. I can't imagine she remembers anything.
Yeah, so unfortunate for her, but hopefully life has treated her better.
Yeah, I hope so. All right, so for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.